Hello everyone, Happy New Year. I'm Professor Ozan Örmeci from Istanbul Kent University. As you know, as part of our interview series, I continue to conduct interviews with important scholars and experts and also statesmen for International Political Academy, our website shortly known as the UPA. Today we have a special and distinguished guest from the United States of America, US, retired Ambassador Matthew Bryza, or Matt Bryza, is an
Yeah.
experienced diplomat who served previously in the White House as part of the National Security Council staff. Mr. Bryza's last official duty was the US Ambassador in Baku, Azerbaijan. Mr. Ambassador continues to work as consultant to some important companies and think tanks. Matthew Bryza, it's an honor to be with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Armechi. I'm very happy to have a chance to exchange some views and share some thoughts with you, your students, and your community. Thank you.
My
And
pleasure.
happy New Year.
Okay. Matthew Bryza, my first question will be on President-elect Trump. President-elect Trump will soon get into office and start working as the 47th U.S. president. There are contrasting views about President Trump's interesting charisma and style, but generally there's a positive approach to him, interestingly. So how we could explain, I mean, as an important diplomat, experienced diplomat, how we can explain the rise of President Trump in terms of US domestic politics and maybe relations with the other countries?
Yeah, it's a great question. And by the way, I mean, the U.S. is still very divided. President Trump did win the popular vote by a couple of million votes, which is the first time the Republicans have done that since 2004. But his margin of victory in the key states that, according to to me, kind of unusual U.S. electoral system, was small. He won by about 200 and I think 30,000 votes overall. So in four critical states, really three states. And so you could say that his election will have an impact on everyone in the world, 8 billion people, yet decided by maybe 230,000 American voters. So it's a very strange situation. Um, but again, the way the U.S. Electoral system works, it turns out that President Trump, his party, and largely himself have control then over, of course, the presidency, and so the whole executive branch of government, and then both houses of Congress, and to a certain extent, not control over the courts, because our courts and our judicial system are independent, but on the Supreme Court, he was able to place on the court or nominate on the court during his last term enough conservative judges such that the philosophy of the court is in line with his. So President Trump has a disproportionate amount of power and influence compared with the number of voters who decided the election. Now, why did the election go in the way it did, and how did President Trump arise, which was your question? Um, I think in the first iteration of President Trump, so in the 2016 election campaign, President Trump or Donald Trump was not expected to win. He didn't expect to win. And if you go back and you look at uh, his reaction coming down or coming into the room when he was, receiving congratulations, he seemed to be surprised, and his wife Melania seemed to be shocked. And we now know that he did not expect to win. So how did he win the first time? Um, I think what happened was, or what's clear what happened was he was able to energize and win by a much narrower margin, by the way, than in the last election and just now in 2024. He was able to energize sentiment, especially among white, lesser educated men, that they were being left behind by globalization and that the US political system, especially the Democrats, did not care about them, and that they were being disadvantaged as the US did what Republicans have wanted since Ronald Reagan, which is rely on free trade to create economic efficiencies by using lower cost labor, especially in countries like Mexico, with whom the US has a free trade agreement, which meant jobs that lesser educated white men in factory used to perform in factories were going away. And also the culture wars, if we can call them that, in the United States, were disadvantaging white men, and we're embracing the importance of so-called, as I don't, they say men of color, so Latinos and African Americans and women as well. So that was in 2016. Fast forward to 2020, those culture wars had been stoked by the Trump team, and tensions were high. And this time around, even black men felt that they were not being appreciated by the Democratic Party. So even though Kamala Harris is black, or black and Asian American, South Asian American, many black men decided not to vote for her. Finally, it was economics that really were behind everything for this Trump victory. U.S. inflation is decreasing, and compared to Turkey, it's low. I mean, way lower. I mean, for around 3%, 4% it has been. But for America, that's really high. And so voters were asked the question, basically rhetorically or directly, are you better off economically today than you were under President Trump? And the numbers, the academic numbers, the reality is that, well, yes, even though prices have increased quickly in relative terms in the United States, as you know, with the inflation rate where it is, the prices are, and wages have increased even faster than prices, which means the average American is better off economically than before because wages increased faster than prices. Psychologically, in the United States, people remember what the price of basic items was under President Trump the first time versus today under President, or recently under President Biden. So people look at the price of eggs, of basic foodstuffs, of gasoline, and they see them higher now, so they think they were better off before, even though in reality, they earn more money now relative to prices than they did previously. And so even though many women, especially suburban women who have been quite important in determining the outcome of elections in those small number of states I mentioned, they care about reproductive rights or abortion, which the Republicans have restricted. Even though many Americans also care about Trump's professed desire to undermine some of the institutions of American democracy. Those are important issues. But it looks like, above all, what decided this election was concerns about the economy and this perception or that Americans feel that the things were cheaper under President Trump the first time, and they want to return to those lower prices that President Trump has promised, even if they also care about other issues like democracy and reproductive rights.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. So there is this term in political science, retrospective voting. Maybe you referred to this people looking at the prices of especially suburban women. And there is this famous phrase from, I think, President Clinton's first election. It's the economy, stupid. It's
Yeah.
same as a benchmark. So maybe that's how President Trump was elected. But also, I think there were other psychological factors like the assassination attempt, etc. So my second question, Mr. Ambassador, will be on President Trump's perception of Turkey particularly, and maybe Muslim world in general. So I think you know him much better than us because you served in the U.S. Department of State. So probably you have much deeper understanding of American foreign policy's fundamentals and President Trump's style. So could you tell us about maybe President Trump's, approach to Turkey?
Yeah, thank you. By the way, your summary of my initial remarks was great. And I think the assassination attempt did generate some more momentum for President Trump that helped put him over the edge to win. Sure, yeah. And I also, by the way, going to your second question, I also spent 4 years working in the White House of President George W. Bush. So that gave me a chance, yeah, to observe how national politics interact with traditional U.S. foreign policy objectives. And then sometimes there's a contradiction and sometimes everything is aligned. So when it comes specifically to Turkey and President Trump's view, so number one, he grew to admire and like President and respect President Erdogan. So there was some tension, especially around August 2018 when President Trump imposed sanctions, tariffs on Turkish steel imports into the United States, largely in retaliation for the continued detention and house arrest or release into house arrest of then Pastor Brunson. The two leaders, the presidents, got beyond all that. And I think it's clear, I know it's clear. I just came back from Washington, right, where I met with some senior foreign policy people on the Trump team. It's clear that President Trump would like to rebuild a positive personal relationship with President Erdogan. But what's not clear is how Syria will play out. On the one hand, President Trump, all things being equal, would like to withdraw the now 2,000 U.S. forces, more or less, that are present in Syria. It used to be around 900, I guess, but it has now increased recently. We learned up to 2,000, and they're in Deir el-Zor, mostly, right, in northeast Syria, working together with the YPG, which is clearly a terrorist organization, and focused very much on making sure that the 9,000 ISIS terrorists, well, operatives plus their family members, in the prison camp in that area of northeast Syria are not allowed to be released. And so the Trump administration has one argument, which is that we want to get our troops out and we want to have a more positive relationship with Ankara. At the same time, they are worried that it's possible that Turkey might use some sort of military operation in northeast Syria, which could somehow lead to the lack of security in that prison and the release of those ISIS fighters and a resurgence of the sort of largely Sunni-based violence that plagued Iraq way back a couple of decades ago. I personally don't think there's any danger of Turkey launching that sort of a military operation. What I've been trying to persuade those Trump senior foreign policy aides of with regard to Syria is that it seems that soon there's a good chance that Abdullah Öcalan will accept the proposal that was formally made by MHP leader Devlet Bahçeli for the PKK to lay down arms, to make peace with Turkey, and in Syria then integrate as Mr. al-Sarraj and the HTS leadership in Damascus have insisted. In other words, that the YPG forces integrate into Syria's army. If the Trump administration does, sorry, and if that happens, I think we'll see the vast majority of YPG forces and PKK forces in Iraq lay down arms, but there will still be a residual amount of fighters, those that Kandil in Iraq want to keep fighting, and some that of the YPG that will want to keep fighting. So at that point, it's crucial that Ankara and Washington come up with an agreement on how to manage those residual YPG fighters in Syria. Because if the United States simply supports them or continues to support them, the United States de facto will be working to undermine the territorial integrity and unity of a new Syria, which then risks prolonging Syria's civil war and risks the breakup and the partition of Syria into individual pieces, which would be an open, I would argue, geostrategic wound in the Middle East for potentially decades to come. So there's a big decision coming up for the Trump administration. And frankly, I don't know what will carry the day. Is it Trump's desire to get out of Syria, or the bureaucratic momentum of continuing to work with the YPG that will be determinant for Trump? My guess is he's going to want to get out, and hopefully will then want to work with Turkey on those residual YPG fighters that refuse to lay down arms, which means they'll have to be defeated on the battlefield. But I don't know for sure that that's the way Trump will decide.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Another question will be about Turkey's influence over the US Congress and White House. I mean, since you know the American politics much deeper and better than us, uh, would you advise some strategies to Turkey? Because generally we have president to president diplomacy in recent years, especially in the first Trump presidency, but I think also in Obama term to some degree, and even Clinton term. Uh, some Turkish American scholars living in the US and criticizing Turkish foreign policy often underline that Turkey doesn't have a strong hold in US Congress. In the past decades, it was the Jewish lobby or Israeli lobby defending Turkey against other ethnic minorities and lobbies. But now Israel lobby is clearly not on Turkey's side. So, what would you advise Turkey to be more influential over American domestic politics? Because US domestic politics, I studied recently, it's very complex and it has its own dynamics based on lobbying, companies, deals, etc. And it has a working democracy despite its problems. All countries have its own problems. So maybe Turkey has misunderstandings of US democracy. What do you think, Mr. Ambassador? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, first of all, you're right that there are lobbying groups, not just companies, but private organizations that under the US Constitution have freedom of speech and have the right to try to influence public debate and attitudes as well as government policy. So Turkey has traditionally had or recently had three strong constituencies working against it. One is, of course, part of or the Armenian American community. Uh, One part of the Armenian American community always is looking to be constructive and trying to find a way to make Armenia safer from their perspective. And that means with regard to Turkey and Azerbaijan mostly. But the other one, the Armenian National Committee of America, is an organization that profits from literally monetarily from keeping conflict alive and a sense of fear and distrust of Turkey. And so they're highly influential. They have a lot of money. Now their main ally in the U.S. Congress, Senator Robert Menendez, is likely to spend the rest of his life in prison for corruption. So that deals a blow to that bit of lobbying. But still, Armenian Americans have a compelling story that they tell, and we all know about the history of 1915, et cetera. Then there's FETÖ, which has been a very influential lobbying force and very skillful in Washington, and they're still there doing their work. And then finally, there's the Greek American community. The Greek American community, however, it's going to follow largely the lead of Athens in its relation in Greece's relations with Turkey. And the Greek American community is much more moderate than, for example, the Armenian National Committee of America, which always wants conflict with Turkey and with Azerbaijan. So what I'm trying to say is I think foreign policy is the way for Ankara to improve the mood toward Turkey, both in the public of the United States and in the government. So Greek-Turkish relations are warming. The relations between Prime Minister Mitsotakis and President Erdogan are strong and improving. And it's leading to, as I've noticed in my conversations and visits to Cyprus, leading to a potentially new positive dynamic with cooperation, for example, on electricity deliveries from Turkey to the island becoming more politically realistic in the context of Greece encouraging that sort of cooperation so it could be Greek companies benefiting from electricity delivered from Turkey to Cyprus. Okay, so that's a start maybe. Greek Turkish relations are improving, so that can then help to improve the attitude of Greek Americans toward Turkey in the US. But the other key one is going to be Syria. We already talked about what to do with the YPG in the future. For the United States, the protection of ethnic and religious minorities in northern Syria is a big issue. It's clear that Christians in northern Syria were repressed and mistreated by the YPG, PYD in northern Syria. And evangelical Christians, so the most sort of, how to put it, fundamentalist American Christians are a huge part of President Trump's political base. So around 35 to 40% of all American voters are evangelical Christians. And President Trump routinely gets the votes of about 80% of that 40% of American voters. So that gives Trump like between 30 and 35% uh, support among all American voters who happen to be evangelical Christians. So I think that if Ankara can stress that in northern Syria, it's important to work together with the United States to protect the rights of all ethnic minorities, whether they be Arab, Turkoman, or Kurdish, as well as all religious minorities, whether they be Islamic or Christian. That is a way to win over and change the minds of those in the United States who are saying, oh, Ankara's goal in northern Syria is to occupy the territory and not respect the rights of these minorities. There's a misperception in Washington, finally, my last remark, that Turkey seeks to repress and even attack and kill the Kurdish population of Syria, which is crazy. Turkey's, as we know, its gripe is with one Marxist-Leninist terrorist militia and not with all Kurds. But that fact is not appreciated because of all the lobbying that I talked about a moment ago to the contrary in Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. We didn't speak before, but maybe you could contribute on that issue also if you want to respond. Senator Rubio from Florida, Marco Rubio, will probably soon get into the office as the new
Yeah.
Secretary of State. He will get the congressional consent because of Republican majority and his popularity. Uh, can we, I mean, compare to Secretary Blinken, for instance, that have been very influential U.S. Foreign ministers or secretaries of state. In the old times, of course, Hillary Clinton, Henry Kissinger, I mean, dozens of them. So, Senator Rubio, what do you think about him, especially concerning his views about Turkey? So,
Yeah, well, first of all, he's a national political figure. I mean, Secretary Blinken, somebody I've worked with for years, deeply respect, but he was like me, a career, either diplomat or member of the national security bureaucracy. Marco Rubio is a senator. He ran for president. He is a powerful political figure in his own right. So he brings an unusual amount of authority to the position of Secretary of State, as did former Senator Hillary Clinton, as you rightfully acknowledged. Um, Also, Senator Rubio or Secretary of State designate Rubio is a traditionalist when it comes to U.S. foreign policy. He believes the United States has a role to play on the global stage in pursuit of traditional American national security interests, which means to deter Russia from its invasion and make sure Russia doesn't win in its invasion of Ukraine, and to deter Russian aggression in the Black Sea region, which touches directly upon Turkey. Rubio takes a hard line toward China and its aggressive ambitions in the South China Sea and beyond in East Asia and in Indo-Pacific region, and Taiwan, of course. And he comes from Florida, right, where there is an influential and pretty large Greek American diaspora, especially in a place called New Smyrna, Florida, right? So like New Izmir, Florida. But as a foreign policy traditionalist and realist, for him, NATO is, like for Joe Biden, very important. Turkey has the second largest military in NATO. And during his time as senator, he has stated that Turkey deserves and should get U.S. support for its attempts to stabilize northern Syria. He's on record as having said that in the past. So overall, I'm not sure, deep inside what his philosophy is toward Turkey, but as a traditionalist, as a NATO-centric senator, And as someone who has said there's a U.S. interest in Turkey being able to stabilize northern Syria, I think he will be somebody who seeks ways for the U.S. and Turkey to collaborate in a strategic sense. But again, much will depend on what happens in dealing with the residual bit of the YPG that will be on the ground. Having said that, it was just announced by the U.S. Treasuries that the Biden administration now has issued a general license to begin interacting more actively with the new Syrian government. So the restriction on doing business with the new Syrian government has been lifted. And also now the restrictions on or discouragement of investments in and cooperation with the new Syrian government on energy has been lifted. And so it's clear that cooperation on energy is a real priority for Ankara, as Energy Minister Bayraktar has made clear. And so that's also an area, I think, where the U.S. and Turkey, under a Secretary of State Rubio, can work together.
And one final question, maybe you could just respond shortly. So, you served in Azerbaijan and you lived in Turkey for many years. You've been living in Istanbul for many years. I mean, in terms of Turkish people's, including Azerbaijan also, perception of Americans and the United States of America as a great state, uh, do you think there are prejudices or too much conspiracy theories about Americans, American foreign policy, or generally people perceive Americans as positively and friend of Turks?
Well, I think generally Turkish people look at Americans in general as friends of Turks. They like American culture, they like Americans, but they traditionally have not liked the U.S. government. I
Right.
do think that the part of Turkey that's Middle Eastern is like everybody in this region, overly prone to conspiracy theories. In my history of being, engaged at the very highest level in U.S. policymaking toward Turkey, I find it's ridiculous how people in Turkey often think there's a deep state that somehow controls the U.S. president. I've said many times to my Turkish friends, I was often the last person or one of the last people who would talk to the U.S. president about Turkey. So I know what information the U.S. president was receiving. I know the advice he was given because I was giving it in many cases. And often the response is, but you just didn't know about the secret people, deeper in the state. No, there were none. I was it. You could say I was part of the deep state because I had such access to the U.S. president. There is no deep state like that in the U.S. that's working against Turkey. So yeah, the conspiracy thinking is excessive here. But what can you do? That's part of Middle Eastern thinking. Um, but I also believe that the U.S. and Turkish national security interests are misaligned still in Syria, as long as the U.S. violates its own policy of not working with one terrorist organization against another one. Having said that, overall, in general, U.S. Turkish strategic interests are overall aligned, with
Mm.
being the two largest militaries in NATO, sharing a desire to deter Russian aggression in the Black Sea and elsewhere, although Ankara often views the U.S. as being more aggressive than Ankara would like in deterring Russia. But that's a minor difference that can be fixed. I think the United States failed to listen to Turkey's advice not to invade Iraq without a clear plan and successful plan to rebuild Iraq. And so I think that Ankara will always think Washington is naive in the Middle East. Ankara and Washington are still misaligned on Israel or Israel-Gaza. But as we get close to a ceasefire agreement, I think Washington will come around to seeing that Ankara could potentially play a role in delivering Hamas and maybe playing a guarantor role on the ground in Gaza. And if that happens, then I think the Turkish general attitudes toward the U.S. will come around and be more supportive. But at the end of the day, I, the U.S. doesn't care very much about what the Turkish public thinks about it, but the Turkish or the U.S. side has still residual negative views about what Turkey's intentions are. As I mentioned, with regard to Kurds writ large, I think that's a misunderstanding on the U.S. side, but that needs to be resolved.
Mr. Ambassador, Thank you so much for your time. It was a great pleasure.
Great pleasure for me too, Professor. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, and we wish good luck to new American administration. I hope things will be much better in the future.
I do too. Thank you. Look forward to working together.